Hi, today we'll be discussing botulism and the effects that it has on the nervous system. So, the nervous system has a standard function that it usually runs by, and this function works as um, the transmission of information to the internal body from one's environmental stimuli via these neurons, and they're able to transmit new information through our senses by triggering an associated response. Botulism disrupts and denigrates all components of the nervous system, which include the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, the automatic nervous system, which is the involuntary processes of responding to external stimuli, and the somatic nervous system, which is the voluntary processes of responding to external stimuli. And botulism affects the whole nervous system. What is botulism? Botulism is a neuroparalytic syndrome, and it's a rare syndrome that disrupts the nervous system by creating blocks in neural pathways that ultimately causes flaccid paralysis. And what exactly is botulism? Botulism is actually a neurotoxin that is known as Clostridium botulinum, and it's a rod-shaped bacterium that produces this neurotoxin protein called botulinum. And it's right here, as you can see. And the types of neurons affected are motor neurons, which include muscles, which I'll discuss later on, and sensory neurons, and neurons controlling secretions. So how does botulism affect the nervous system? It disrupts the proper transmission of neurons. So as showcased to the left, on the left side of this picture right here, here's a normal transmitter release of between neurons. Here's their interaction occurring. Here's the transmission of information occurring. And so this happens through a very complex process that's actually totally inhibited by these neurotoxins that, as you could see, just create total blockades, stopping this process from fully occurring. And how does this process usually occur? This is very important to focus on before I explain how this process occurs with botulism at play. So this process usually occurs through synapses, which is where the neurons transmit information. And these synapses are necessary for neural signaling because neurons can only transmit information at an axon terminal, as we discussed in topic 57, where neurons aren't like hormones when they signal information. It's a lot less of a indirect process where it's a lot more of a direct process. And so there must be a connection between the axon terminals in order for this transmission of information to occur. So this transmission of information occurring is known as the excitation contraction coupling process. And this is the process that occurs for the neuromuscular transmission of neurons. This is how your muscles contract. And so this is when a motor neuron's action potential allows for depolarization of the muscle cell, which is the electrical charge, the electrical chemical gradient that we previously discussed in our topics. And this releases acetylcholine. This motor neuron's action potential releases acetylcholine, as you could see here, this acetylcholine and these little vesicles from its nerve endings to acetylcholine receptors on another neuron's membrane. And these acetylcholine receptors, when activated, opens the ion channel that allows for diffusion to occur. And as I mentioned, this diffusion is so important for the electrochemical gradient to be fueled. And so energy could actually be generated, and these processes can actually occur. And so this diffusion of ions generates the muscle contraction. And so what occurs when this botulism is at play? The process of these toxins destroying and disrupting this regular neural movement at neuromuscular transmission sites. So as I mentioned previously, these neurotoxins create these blockades that inhibit a neuron's ability to transmit this information. And these neurotoxins alter neurons at their neuromuscular junction site by cleaving the synaptic connection, the protein receptor, between the motor nerve and a muscle. And the neuromuscular junction site is where the nerves transmit their action potential to the muscle, which is very important. And this synaptic connection at this neuromuscular junction site facilitates the synaptic vesicle fusion, as I previously mentioned, which is very important because this synaptic vesicle fusion allows and releases the neurotransmitters acetylcholine from the synaptic terminal. And this will be prevented if the action potential isn't generated. Additionally, the action potential fuels the synapse will be prevented as well. Yes. And the action potential is what generates the process for the muscle contraction to occur. Therefore, when the action potential fails to be transmitted or generated, a person will be unable to contract and control their muscles. And so over some time, this will result in total lack of control of muscle contraction because it forces muscles to completely relax, which ultimately leads to flaccid paralysis. And so there's different types of botulism, different types of ways you could be exposed to botulism. There's foodborne botulism, which is botulism that is consumed, and it's consumed via foods like canned foods that produce these toxins at a very increased rate because there's no oxygen supply or filtration in these canned foods. Another example is wound botulism, is when this bacterium enters a wound and the productions of toxins occur inside the body. And lastly, infant botulism, when this bacterium infiltrates an infant's intestinal tract around the ages of 2 to 8 months. And those are the 3 types of different ways you could be exposed to botulism. And some symptoms of botulism include weakened ability to control basic motor functions, double vision, muscle weakness, blurry vision, weakened breathing, weakened movement and control of the eyes, and ultimately results in paralysis. And in summary, botulism attacks the entire nervous system, including the central, peripheral, automatic, and somatic nervous systems. Botulism is a toxic bacterium that prevents the standard transmission of motor and sensory and secretion neurons. And when the standard transmission of neurons is inhibited by botulism, it will degrade a person's ability to control their motor functions and their entire nervous system at large. And this deterioration of physiological control from botulism will ultimately end with total flaccid paralysis. Thank you.